Hereby, I open this academic ceremony in which Francesco Giancaterini will defend his academic thesis, essays on univariate and multivariate non-causal processes. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear members of the committee, supervisors, colleagues, family and friends, I'm going now to present you the content and the topic of my research thesis, whose title is Essays on Univariate and Multivariate Non-Causal Processes. So the area of interest of my thesis is time series analysis. Time series analysis involves analyzing variables whose values are observed over a specific period of time at regular frequencies. In time series analysis, exist several mathematical models that can be employed to analyze the investigated data. And the choice of these mathematical models depends on the structure of the underlying data. Among the most common mathematical models, we have autoregressive models, moving average models, autoregressive moving average models, and all these models have the particular feature that in the estimation procedure, we take into account the present and past information. What mixed causal and non-causal models do, that are the model subject of my thesis, they also take into account future information. However, before to go to non-causal processes, I'm going to quickly introduce you autoregressive processes that are among the most commonly models used in time series. And as the red equation here shows, autoregressive processes, in order to explain the value of a variable at any given time t, exploits a linear combination of its previous past p observation, plus epsilon t, that is the error term. In this thesis, the assumption is that the error term is non-Gaussian. And another assumption that I'm going to make now is that this autoregressive process has its roots that lie outside the unit circle. So these models are usually good to fit processes that, as you can see from the graph here, fluctuate around an average value. Then when a shock hits the variable under investigation, this shock jumps the variable. You can see that we have a jump from 0 to 6. And then since the process is assumed to be stationary, since we have roots outside the unit circle, after some days, the process goes back to fluctuate around the average value. What purely causal autoregressive processes are not able to do is to fit a process like the one in blue here that is characterized by fluctuation over an average value, and then is characterized by a rapid increase followed by a sudden crash. So you can see here that the blue process is exactly the opposite as the red process. And this pattern is pretty similar to those that speculative bubbles have in financial assets. And the need to fit a process like this is among the main reasons why non-causal models have been introduced. And non-causal models, unlike purely autoregressive models, are obtained exploiting a linear combination of its next p observation. However, the topic of my thesis is more in general mixed causal non-causal processes that, as you can see from the graph, they are not characterized by sudden jumps, by rapid increase, followed then by a rapid decrease. And the eventual symmetry of such peaks depends on the causal and non-causal components, as we will see better in chapter 3. Mixed causal and non-causal models have been introduced by Braid and Davis in 1991, and they were introduced as the process you can see in green, that is an autoregressive process, but with the feature that the roots now can also lie inside the unit circle. The roots that lie inside the unit circle are related to the non-causal component of the process, and the roots outside the unit circle are related to the causal component of the process. And a specification like this will be here defined as purely mixed out of RP. Later, in 2008 and 2011, Markkonen and Saikonen provide an alternative specification of mixed causal and non-causal processes. As you can see from the violet equation, this process is given by the product of a lag and lead polynomial. The lag polynomial is the causal polynomial, and the lead polynomial is the non-causal polynomial. In this specification, both the polynomials have the roots outside the unit circle, and is defined here as mar Rs, where R is the order of the causal polynomial, and S is the order of the non-causal polynomial. In the univariate framework, these two specifications are exactly the same. They overlap. So it is always possible, algebraically, to move from one specification to the other. As chapter 5 will show, this is not always true in the multivariate framework. In order to identify the non-causal component of the process, we need that the error term satisfies some assumption. The first assumption is the non-Gaussianity, so the error term has to be non-Gaussian, and IID. And over the years, mixed causal and non-causal models have been implemented in various fields, like, for example, in finance, as I said before, to fit financial assets characterized by speculative bubbles, for example, cryptocurrency, bitcoins, or commodity prices, and in macroeconomics. Indeed, these models can be interpreted as conditions where economic agents have more information than econometricians. So mixed causal and non-causal models are strictly connected to the structural econometric models. So after this quick introduction of my thesis, I will of the models object of the thesis, I will show you the structure of my thesis, where my thesis consists of 6 chapters. The first and 6 are related to the introduction and conclusion, respectively. Second and third one about mixed causal and non-causal models in the univariate framework, that is when y is just one single variable. And the fourth and fifth chapter is about multivariate mixed causal and non-causal process, where y is not one variable but a vector of variables. So let's talk about chapter 2. In the literature, the estimators available to estimate mixed causal and non-causal models falls into 2 main categories: parametric and semi-parametric estimator. This chapter is about parametric estimator. More specifically, it's related to the maximum likelihood estimator. In this framework, a common assumption is to assume that the error term follows a generalized student state distribution. And in such a context, the degrees of freedom of the generalized student state distribution are initially unknown and must be estimated. Some works from some previous works from Heck-Boisin and Gurion-Zakoyan show that, especially in financial econometrics, financial applications, the degrees of freedom may lie between 1.5 and 2. And this may pose some challenges for inference because for degrees of freedom equal or less than 2, the variance of the error term does not exist. So it is not possible to compute the expect efficient information matrix since it has the variance of the error term on the diagonal elements. So what we try to do in this chapter is to find, by a simulation study, a robust estimate of the variance of the residuals, and to replace this robust estimate of the residuals with the variance of the error term in the expect efficient information matrix. Simulation studies show the good performance of this approach, and finally, we implement this strategy in 3 different time series that are related to the COVID-19, daily deaths in Belgium, Brazilian inflation rate, and wheat prices. In chapter 3 of my thesis, I exploit mixed causal and non-causal models to introduce new strategies able to state whether a stochastic or deterministic process is time reversible. So a stochastic deterministic process is defined time reversible if it is invariant under the reversal of the time scale. And I'm going to show you an intuitive example to let you understand this definition. So the red process is a clear example of time reversible process, because whenever we reverse the horizontal axis of the time, we can see that we obtain a process that is exactly the same as the original one. This is not true for the blue process, and for this reason, the blue process is an example of time irreversible process. So in our thesis, we established condition 3.1 that says that whenever we can fit a Mar model to our data, then the process is defined time reversible if the causal and non-causal polynomials are identical. In order to have these two polynomials identical, we need that R is equal to S, so the order of the causal polynomial is the same as the non-causal polynomial, and that the causal coefficients has to be equal to the non-causal coefficients. Finally, we implement these strategies to 14 climate indicators, and the results reveal that some of these processes are time irreversible. So one possible interpretation of the results is that some of these variables may be approaching an irreversible state. In chapter 4 of the thesis, we deal with a G-COV estimator that, unlike the maximum likelihood estimator, is a semi-parametric estimator that so doesn't rely on any assumption about the error distribution. This estimator was proposed by Guriu and Jasiak in 2017, and a new version has been provided in 2022. And in the objective function of this estimator, we have the variance of the linear and nonlinear transformations of the IID error term. The main goal of this chapter is to show that the G-COV estimator, when applied to non-causal processes, or more in general, mixed causal and non-causal processes, may present some local minimum, affecting our estimate. So what we propose to avoid this issue in this chapter is to use simulated annealing combined with the G-COV estimator. Simulated annealing, it's an optimization algorithm that performs particularly well when we have many local minimum issues, like you can see in the picture in the objective function. And the simulation studies reveal that this optimization algorithm perform well even when applied to the G-COV estimator. And to confirm our results, in our empirical investigation, we use two bivariate processes. So the first process is wet and corn, and the second process is soybean and wet, and they are related to commodity prices. Finally, in the chapter 5 of the thesis, we deal with the two different specifications that I previously showed you, that is the mixed autoregressive and Mar representation. And as I said before, in the univariate framework, it is always possible to move from these two specifications. What we show in this chapter is that in the multivariate framework, this is not always true. So in other words, some DGP can be correctly specified by only one of those two specifications. In the literature, there is a lack of theoretical conditions that establish when one of these two representations can correctly identify the process. So in this regard, we try to fill this gap by introducing two theorems. And finally, we implement these two specifications in a bivariate process of cryptocurrencies, and the results reveal that we obtain a different identification and estimation of the process according to the specification that has been used. This is the end of my thesis. I give my word back to the prorector. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. The opposition will be opened by Professor Dr. Bertrand Candelin, who was the chair of the assessment committee and who is professor of international economics at both this university and Université Catholique de Louvain. The floor goes to Professor Candelin.
Thank you, Mr. the Prorector. Dear candidate, thank you for having me the opportunity to read your works. I congratulate you. It's quite interesting. I appreciate it very much the mathematical derivation, the model. And on the top of that, I see, I come from time to time here by the invitation of your promoter for this causal, non-causal model. And I see the evolution, compared to the previous thesis. I think there's something that progress. I begin to see some extension. So I think Alain has also a new idea, and it's clear to see the new idea on this model. So congratulations.
Thank you.
It's well done and clear. Still, okay. My question is about chapter 3 and the economic interpretation. So I do understand quite well the theories, the theorems about the irreversibility, that the causal, non-causal polynomial are identical and so on. Still, in terms of economic content, I'm a little bit lost, especially in terms of the conclusion you can make. Let me explain. When I think about irreversibility, I have an idea about persistence. And to say that when a process is irreversible, that means it does not come back to initial state. So in the chapter, when you talk about climate change, you interpret this way, but I am a little bit puzzled. In particular, page 46, you talk about HP filter and non-stationary case. Something that is stationary, can it be persistent? I want, in my question, you to have a clear economic, so no mathematical formulation, a clear economic interpretation or intuition behind the concept, knowing that, at the moment, our bosses are polluting the world in Dubai at the COP28, and they have to take decision on what are the action to be done to stop this climate change, and to know if it can be done or not. So I want you to give really an economic definition, and within this framework, to see which action can be put in place, knowing that according to the information, to the variable you consider, you get different results. So that's 2 questions. Sorry.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and for your question. So, first of all, I have to say that when I said before that time irreversibility in climate indicators may be meaning that some of these variables are approaching an irreversible state, it is because the assumption that is made before is that we associate the concept of environmental tipping point with time reversibility. So when we connect these 2 topics, then we can say that we can consider the idea that if the process is time irreversible, it's approaching an irreversible state. As concerning the economic implications, time reversibility, for example, in macroeconomic, can be very useful to analyze business cycle fluctuations, to see, for example, if there is a symmetry in the crisis moment and in the recovery periods, to see if there is eventual asymmetry, so if they behave exactly when a country goes into a crisis and goes out from a crisis. And about the concept of the HP filter, so the main idea was to extend the work that has been made by Professor Proietti, because usually time reversibility can be implemented in stationary processes. However, this was this paper from Professor Proietti that tried to extend the notion of time reversibility also to non-stationary processes. So the idea was to follow this pattern, and we decided to use the HP filter because even if non-stationary, the closed form solution of the trend component is given by a March-2, where the causal and non-causal polynomial are identical. So it doesn't, we can define it as time reversible in the sense that is symmetric over time, because these two weights, the causal and non-causal components, are identical. And yes, I don't know if I answered your question. There was some...
Perhaps the link with persistence, can you extend on that?
Sorry?
The link between irreversibility and persistence.
You mean when, like, persistence in non-stationary processes?
In stationary, I don't make any assumption. Persistence economically, not theoretically, but persistence of the shock and irreversibility in whatever system, stationary, non-stationary.
In economics, as I said before, the persistency is an element that explains business cycles. We have a determined persistency component, so it depends from the application that we are considering. But yes, as I said before, macroeconomics can be useful for analyze the business cycle fluctuations, or yes. Thank you.
Well, thank you. The opposition will be continued by Professor Dr. Friederike Becke. She's online, as we will most probably see in a few seconds. She was also a member of the assessment committee, and she is Professor of Economics at the Cergy-Paris University. And the floor goes to Professor Becke.
Thank you. I would like first to congratulate Francesco for this very, very good work that I really appreciate to read from page 1 to just before the references section, because you have added many insights within this completely homogeneous framework of mixed causal, non-causal models, both univariate in the first time and then multivariate. Your contributions, each chapter gives a contribution to that literature, goes a little step forward in different directions, I would say. And it was really, really, I was very glad to read this work, definitely. So congratulations, it's well written as well, so it was really easy to read, and so that was my first and before all remark. Thank you very much for having me in your... Oh, I hear another...
No, please go ahead.
Is someone else talking? Okay, so let me turn, can you hear me?
Hello?
Okay,
Yeah.
so let me turn to my first question. So it's about chapter 2. I know it's published, but nevertheless, I have a question regarding the way you think, or maybe you do prove that your new estimator performs optimally for degrees of freedom of your generalized tendency distribution with very small value from 1 to some D, capital D finite number. And you write page, I think it was page 13, that it is true, although it is not possible to derive the theoretical limiting distribution of the parameters in the heavy tail framework. And you show that using Monte Carlo simulations, if I understand correctly the chapter. So I have 2 sub-questions within that topic. The first one is, what do you mean by performs optimally for this estimator? And the second one is that when looking at tables 2.1 and 2.2, it doesn't seem to me that the ERF, tend to the nominal size of 5% as the sample size increases. Instead, it seems that the frequency goes to 0 as T increases. Because when you end up with this sample length of 3,000, your empirical rejection frequencies are around, let's say, 3.5%, something like that. So I would have been curious to see what would have been the result for a sample size of 10,000, because you do very 700,000 simulations. So I don't think the issue comes from the number of simulations. But so do you have any idea of what's going on? Or am I wrong?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and for your question. So about chapter 2, so first of all, when I say it optimally, maybe it's not exactly the right word. What I want to say is that, as you said, we implement this methodology, and we try to extend the results proposed by Rousseau, where he shows an example in the Gaussian framework. So he shows that it's always possible to obtain in the Gaussian framework, a robust estimate of the standard deviation of the of a variable when we multiply a constant to the median absolute deviation. What we try to do in the paper is to take again also the job made by Rousseau and try to see how empirically we can compute that value of k that provides a robust estimate. So for when the variance of the error term is finite, there are the theoretical results that are proposed by that paper. So in our framework, we try to extend these results when the population variance is not finite. So in this case, there are not theoretical, as you say, there are not theoretical results that we can exploit to confirm this. And in this regard, I try to rely on the results based on the Monte Carlo simulation. So the difference that we have when we are in a framework with indefinite variance, the main difference, I would say, is that the standard deviation of the variable under investigation, in our case the residuals, depends on the size of the sample, depends on the sample size and on the degrees of freedom. And this approach, it is an approach that we can implement only in finite sample sizes, because this result is based on the residuals. So, of course, we need that the sample size is finite, and is a function of the degrees of freedom and sample size, because as much as the degrees of freedom decreases, then we expect heavy tails in the data, and as much as the sample size is larger, since the population variance is indefinite, we expect that the standard deviation, or the variance of the residuals, will increase. So it is also true that when the sample size goes to infinity, the empirical rejection frequencies tend to decrease a bit. Indeed, this methodology, it is a methodology that can only be implemented when we have finite sample sizes, and I think that like the standard deviation of the residuals goes to go infinity with the increasing of sample size. But our idea, it was to show through the analysis of box plots that this divergence to infinity occurs at a rate that can be not to a fast rate. So for sample size relatively not too high, we can apply this methodology. The issue in this framework is that, for example, there is a paper proposed by Cavalieri that it shows a bootstrap methodology to make inference in such a framework. But it does do only for purely non-causal model. And he said that there will be much more complications in the in the mixed models. So yes, even if these results for large sample sizes may give us some empirical rejection frequencies that are a bit smaller than 5%, I would say that the main positive aspects of this approach is that they are easy to apply and they good performance in sample sizes. So we need to be aware before to implement that we may have some issues to implement this methodology in large sample sizes.
Okay. The session will be continued by Dr. Leonard Lieb, who was also a member of the assessment committee and who is assistant professor of economics at this university. The floor goes to Dr. Lieb.
Dear Francesco, also from my side, congratulations on a fine thesis. It was very enjoyable to read. I had planned to ask you a question about chapter 3, but, well, Bertrand Candelon, next to me, made that quite useless, what I wrote up. So I'm going to ask you something else. I do something what I always wanted to do. I'll ask one of your paronyms to read proposition 7 and want to have a short discussion with you about that proposition.
The interpretation of mixed causal and non-causal models in economics is closely tied to modeling expectations' impact on economic variables and non-fundamentalness in structural econometric models.
So, that's an interesting statement, an interesting proposition, and a pretty bold one as well. I'm wondering, well, in particular because you put this as a proposition at the beginning of your thesis, but you don't explicitly go back to that problem throughout your thesis. So I'm wondering a little bit, you described that there, or you mentioned that there are close ties between the modeling of expectations and what you briefly mentioned here, the problem of non-fundamentalness in structural econometric models, and that mixed autoregressive models may address that issue to some extent. I wonder how that can be addressed and how does it help, how mixed autoregressive models do help in order to shed some light on cause relationship, because structural econometric models are there to identify or to estimate causal relationships. And how does it go beyond providing sufficient amount of information to be to enable the researcher in principle to identify models? Does it help for identification? Does it help for estimating causal relationships?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and for your question. So if I'm not wrong, you mean like using non-causal models to test whether we have non-fundamentalness in our data, or?
Now, well, there was no my question. You say that it relates to the issue of non-fundamentalness in structural econometric models.
Yes.
I do see that point. I understand that if there's information insufficiency in a sense, including information contained in future variables, is helpful. But that doesn't help me yet to estimate a causal model. And you mentioned explicitly the term structural models. And I'm wondering whether one can do, in a meaningful way, causal inference in models such that you proposed in your thesis or those that you have discussed in your thesis.
Okay, I tried to answer your question. So first of all, in this framework, so we are in non-Gaussian framework. And like, for example, if you use the vector autoregressive specification with root inside and outside the unit circle, the roots inside are able to capture this non-causal component. And if we implement a structural analysis in our data, even if the specification is causal autoregressive, the impulsive responses functions will be able to capture, will be nonlinear and able to capture this non-causal component. And unlike the Gaussian framework, in the non-Gaussian one, so in the Gaussian framework, usually we have identification issues for the structural analysis. Like usually we are not able to identify the contemporaneous metrics. Let's say the metric speed that also multiplies the structural error term. We are not able to distinguish among the roots if outside or inside the unit circle. In non-causal models, since the error term is non-Gaussian, let's say that these models facilitate the structural analysis using the identification component analysis. According to this methodology, the only assumption that we need to make is that the error term, the structural error term, are not just uncorrelated, but also IID. And in this way, using the ICA analysis, we are able to identify, without any restriction, the contemporaneous metrics. So in this sense, we can use non-causal models for structural analysis. And yeah, I'm not sure if it was this what you mean, but
Close enough.
Close enough, okay.
Maybe we have the chance to continue the discussion at one point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Sean Tellig, who is an assistant professor of econometrics at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. The floor goes to Dr. Tellig.
Thank you. Dear Francesco, also I want to congratulate you on a fine thesis. With what I really like is that you touch upon problems that were still open in the literature and you try to solve them. Some of them which I left for you 6 years ago when I was in your shoes. And the other thing is that you try to link it really to real-life applications like your chapter 3 on climate change. So that's very nice to see that indeed quite some progress is being made on non-causal modeling. My question is about chapter 2, essentially. So you assume there that there's a generalized student T distribution on your error term. What you see in the literature is that there's really two types of, I would say fields, essentially, infinite variance and finite variance for the error term. People also sometimes make the assumption of a alpha stable distribution, or maybe even less stringent in the sense that it's just in the domain of attraction of a stable law. So just something, basically an assumption on the tail behavior. My question is, often in these situations, people use simply least squares because you can show that even though the autocorrelations theoretically do not exist, there is still a convergence result there. And I'm wondering, is it not possible to use essentially least squares on a so-called pseudo-causal model? You obtain your standard errors, and then having a mixed causal model is essentially just a matching problem of the roots. So you have to assign the correct roots to the causal polynomial and the non-causal polynomial. So as an expert on standard errors, I was wondering if this is maybe a fruitful way to go forward, to compute standard errors in such a framework, essentially because we have this convergence results of autocorrelation functions in this, even though they're theoretically not existent, let's say. I hope that...
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your nice, kind words and for your question. So this is an interesting question. I didn't think, I never thought to follow such an approach. I would say that would be interesting to try, and for example, to see through a simulation study if this methodology can work. And yes, it would be interesting to see, to apply a t-test and make a Monte Carlo simulation, see then if the empirical rejection frequencies are close or not to the 5%. However, in the denominator of the t-test, in this case, we should use the standard deviation of the OLS estimate that takes into account only the second-order moments of the process. So, to be honest, I don't know if this can affect the estimation, but it would be very interesting to see through a simulation study if this methodology can perform.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Professor Dr. Tomás del Barrio Castro, who is Professor of Econometrics at the Universitat de les Îles Balears. The floor goes to Professor del Barrio Castro.
Okay, thank you. I'm really pleased to be here. I really enjoyed reading your thesis. Congratulations. I really love I really like the last two chapters, the 4 and 5. I think it's very interesting, and I think it's going to follow what you studied in the first and second. My question is very simple. It's not about a chapter, it's overall, right? So in this kind of setting, you have the problem of the initialization with the initial values, and you have also the problem of the bimodality of the adjective function. And in your application, you have the deaths of COVID, and I work out the roots of the two polynomials, and you obtain, in one case, you obtain complete root, right? Mm-hmm. When you have complete root, it's going to be much more complicated to provide initial value. So I want you to see which is your opinion, how is the way we could solve that within the multivariate or the univariate framework where your roots are complex. Thank you.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and for your question. And this is a very good point because initial values is an issue that I show in chapter 4 related to the G-curve estimator. But as many papers show, like for example, the paper wrote by Professor Beck about the maximum likelihood estimator, she shows that we have this issue also in the maximum likelihood estimator. And also in the paper that my supervisor and Daniel wrote about spectral estimation of mixed causal and non-causal models, they also have the same kind of issue. So in chapter 4, we apply these results for the G-curve estimator, but I think that the reasons why we have local minimum issues are very similar, regardless of the specification or the identification estimation technique that we are considering. For example, the paper from Professor Beck shows that if we are considering, let's say that we estimate the causal and non-causal order both equal to 1. So we are considering a 1, 1. And we have a causal coefficient that is 0.8 and non-causal coefficient equal to 0.5. What she shows in the paper is that if we swatch this, the causal coefficient into the lead polynomial and the non-causal coefficient into the like polynomial, then there we have a local minimum issues. And I believe that these two processes, that is the true one and the other one obtained by switching the coefficients, they have the same linear second, or they have the same autocovariance function, and I think this result is confirmed by the fact that she shows that in the Gaussian framework, these two peaks are exactly the same. So the methodology that I used for chapter 3, yes, chapter 2, sorry, it's the strategy that was proposed by Professor Schoen in the Marx package R. So in this Marx package, let's say that we have to estimate the initial values of a March 1. The methodology consists, so since we have that the causal order is equal to 2 in this case, we take the process, estimate by OLS, and take the first estimate as the first initial value for the causal coefficient, and the second estimate as the second coefficient for the initial value of the causal component. In order to obtain the initial value for the non-causal component, since in this case is equal to 1, the package reverses the process, so it means estimating a purely non-causal process of the same order of the non-causal polynomial. So in this case, to estimate by OLS purely non-causal model order 1. And we take this initial value as the non-causal component, initial value of the non-causal component. So I remember that during my first year, we did some simulation studies, and this methodology well performed. But to be honest, I don't remember exactly if there are complex roots, this methodology still perform well or not. An alternative methodology that can be employed is the one indeed proposed by Professor Beck, that is using a grid and range, where we use different combinations of causal and non-causal coefficients, and then extract the estimate that maximizes the likelihood, the log likelihood. What I would advise, since the chapter is to use simulating annealing. Simulating annealing, it's in my simulation studies, so that works very well, and we also wrote a new draft of chapter 4, and we show that it also works very well for the univariate framework. And I believe that this occurs regardless if the roots are complex or real. The only issue about, the drawback of simulating annealing is that the inputs that we are going to insert, there is no theoretical framework that establish which sets like the initial temperature or the number of iterations that we need to. So it is a black box, these inputs, that we need to, in order to know these values, we need to do some empirical studies to show this. And in the multivariate framework, of course, all of these methodologies are more time-consuming. In this reason, I would advise to use, for example, simulated annealing with parallel processors that can reduce much the estimation time. But yes, this is the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Willems will continue the opposition. Dr. Ines Willems is the Associate Professor of Econometrics at this university. The floor goes to Dr. Willems.
Thank you. So, dear Francesco, let me also join my colleagues on congratulating you on a nice piece of work. I'm oftentimes still puzzled by these mixed causal, non-causal models, but after reading your thesis, you were definitely able to advance my understanding further on this topic. So the question that I have for you today is a very general one, namely related to something that you wrote in your impact section. And you read there that, or you wrote there that these mixed causal, non-causal models are largely unexplored still. And I think you have research in mind when you wrote that sentence. But I would say that a lot of our impact also goes through teaching. And when I look then at the curriculum of time series courses that are offered, I would say that oftentimes mixed causal, non-causal models are not on the program there. So I plead guilty myself, but I think that's the case for many of my colleagues. So why is that the case? And if you would be offering now a time series course, would you then include mixed causal, non-causal model on your program? So what are arguments for you to convince me to include it in the time series courses? Thank you.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and for your question. I would not just do an exam, but a bachelor about non-causal models. No, jokes aside, so I recommend these models because so they are nonlinear models, but they are also pretty easy to apply. And the main positive aspect of these models is that they can be implemented in empirical investigations, also giving an interpretation of this nonlinear component with the introduction of the lead polynomial. Because these models, like for example in macroeconomics, they can be very useful whenever we want to fit a process that contains where the expectation play a crucial role. So they are easy to apply, they are nonlinear, and they are able also to give an interpretation of this nonlinearity, which I think distinguish these models from other nonlinear models that can be employed. So, of course, like these models are still, there is a lot of space for the research, I think. For example, when these models were introduced at the beginning, researchers, I think, were not very convinced to use because we can do only estimate by parametric estimators. So I remember the first conference, like some people were saying that the results were affected by the assumption that we do on the error term. But over the years, this issue has been solved by the introduction of some semi-parametric estimator. Another issue that these models have is about the initial values. But like also the literature is moving in this direction, for example, with simulated annealing or the grid and range. It would be interesting also to exploit these models for non-fundamentalness and other macroeconomic implications, but I think that in this regard, maybe the main issue is that we don't have a unique non-causal specification. So if we want to exploit mixed causal and non-causal models, using two different specification may be an issue because we have non-causality, but this non-causality manifests itself in different ways. Like in one specification, we root inside the unit circle, in the other one with a lead polynomial. So yes, I think that these processes are, they should be explored more. But yes, maybe when I will be a professor, I will put in my course, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Arthur Thomas will continue the opposition. Dr. Thomas is Assistant Professor of Econometrics at Université Paris-Dauphine. The floor goes to Dr. Thomas.
So thank you, dear candidates. Thank you for having me in your jury. I have to say it's the first time for me to be on the other side of the PhD defense, and I prefer my place than yours. But I enjoy reading your PhD thesis. It's very nice written, and what I like is the theoretical demonstrations that you did in chapter 4 and 5. Mm-hmm. And the other way that I like in your thesis is basically the fact that you, at each theoretical demonstration, you illustrate by numerical application, and it's very interesting. And this is my question. I have many questions you can discuss later, and I will enjoy to discuss with you because I think it's very interesting research. But my question is more related to the one to Leonard, which is econometric and economic approach, because I'm wondering, in chapter 5 and 4, with the Jacob methodology, you know when you want to identify and doing impulse function response, and particularly when you do identification in non-causal VAR, it's difficult when you use Cholesky decomposition to identify other sorts than the first one. And I'm wondering if, in your case, what's your insight by using the last technology? It could be a nice extension to try to identify other shocks in non-causal mixed causal VAR with chapter 4 and 5 methodology.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and for your question. So, yes, like as I said before, in the Gaussian framework, if we want to identify the contemporaneous matrix, we need to do some restrictions on the contemporaneous matrix, like Cholesky restriction or long run, the restriction proposed by Blanchard-Dequaux about long run restrictions. And what a recent paper from Guriot and Jessiak show is that a good point of these models is that we don't need to do any restrictions on the contemporaneous effect and exploit these independent component analysis that they are bringing ahead. That, like, so the Jacob estimator, it exploits the IID of residuals serially. With the independent component analysis, the idea is to exploit that the structural error terms are not just uncorrelated, but they are IID from each other. So they are also cross-sectional IID. And if we exploit this condition, then we can use the Jacob estimator to identify such a matrix and yes, get some insights into the inputs responses analysis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, this concludes the first round and gives us an opportunity to enter into a second round. It's a custom at this university that we then give first the floor to those who come from farther away and who can come further away than those who are online. So I would like to invite Professor Frédéric Beck for another question, if she would like to have that question in mind already. The floor goes to Professor Beck.
Thank you very much. Yes, I have a second question related to the way you take care of your estimated residuals. As you have stressed many times during your presentation, and also, of course, in the PhD thesis, you need non-Gaussian error terms, but also IID error terms. And yet, in most of your empirical work, you choose to rely on information criteria in order to select the lag order. And I haven't seen any check about the absence of serial correlation in the residuals, but I only could see the correlograms for chapter 5. And more generally, it seems to me that not too much attention is paid in your application to the stationarity of the series. By the way, in chapter 5, you just there is just a very small, short sentence claiming that the cryptocurrency data you're using are stationary. But when I look at the two graphs of those data, it doesn't seem obvious to me that they are actually stationary. So I would have liked maybe to have your feeling about this, maybe two issues, so serial correlation and non-stationarity. Thank you.
Highly esteemed opponent. So, okay, about the IID of residuals, in this regard, there is, so I didn't do any test for IID of residuals, so a full analysis, this is true. But actually the York University is, I spent my last 2 months there, and Professor Jesiak with Ariane, that is her PhD student, are introducing some tests that can be used to test the IID of residuals. So, for example, in chapter 5 of my thesis, we can first estimate a vector autoregressive process, and then, in order to see if that is the correct specification, we can implement this test to the residuals. Like I did a correlogram, and it shows that we don't see any autocorrelation in the graph. I also used the square of the residuals, and we still couldn't see any autocorrelation in the residuals. But it would be interesting to see if you are using the correct specification by using this test that have been introduced. And about stationarity, so it wasn't the main goal of the thesis, to investigate if there was a stationary or non-stationarity in our data, but we only based on the idea on the fact that we could see that these processes try to fluctuate around an average value, and they were characterized by local explosive behavior. But it would be more precise, of course, to introduce some tests, to implement some stationarity tests in the data. But I think that the Dickey-Fuller test in this framework cannot provide the reliable results, because if I'm not wrong, the Dickey-Fuller tests are based on the assumption that the process is strongly linear. So we may obtain not exactly results, and yes, it would be interesting to implement some tests for stationarity. And if I'm not wrong, you wrote a paper about, so it would be interesting to implement your test in those papers.
If you would still like to shortly conclude your response.
Yeah, it was the, thank you.
Yeah, it looked like it, yeah, indeed. Well, the hour is past, and Francesco Giancaterini, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed, and the degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and the quality of your defense, and I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return in this room.
Thank you.
Please all rise.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side, no place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. On the line, I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side, no place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Take the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you've won the battle once you've grown. South side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side, no place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side, no place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. What's on the line? I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Yeah, cold.
Please all rise. Please be seated.
Francesco Giancaterini, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and that of your defense, and in view of its positive verdict, and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Heck is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom, and I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Please all rise.
Wait a bit. Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
By the authority vested in us, by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Francesco Giancaterini, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached with custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university.
Please be seated.
The laudatio will also be done by Professor Heck.
I know I have 6 minutes, but I need some elements. So, dear Francesco, dear Dr. Giancaterini now, congratulations. Inter won yesterday, right?
Sorry?
Inter won yesterday.
Ah, yes, 3-0.
Congratulations. Gianluca told me so. And congratulations, of course, for your thesis. This is a great achievement indeed. So it is customary to briefly summarize your journey from the beginning we met to today. And to be honest, as Dr. Tell could say, and you said twice, to be honest, during your presentation. Sean, you notice it? I don't understand what happened. It was so fast. Time flew during these 4 years, and it was incredible how fast it was. I do not even understand how you arrived in Maastricht. I remember that a former PhD student, Caterina, talked about someone that she knew from Italy, and that person wanted to do a thesis in econometrics. No clue how you knew Maastricht. No clue how you knew Caterina. I don't want to know, but she insisted. She insisted a lot and several times that we meet, and hence at that time you were lucky. You are still lucky, but you were lucky at that time because we had a slot available at the department, and I asked you or Katrina to send your file, your resume, your grades, and they were quite good actually. And it appeared that you were very motivated to start a thesis, and we talk about non-fundamental shocks. And at that time, because apparently from the questions of Lennart, you are less interested in non-fundamental shocks, but at that time you were very interested in non-fundamental shocks. Then you started in 19. You didn't start at the best period, because we had in January 2020 the hacking of the university. So the university, we can not even have contact by emails, because the computers, the server was done. And then when finally we got a better connection, we had the COVID, right? So we had to work remotely, online, and it was not obvious. But we start to work remotely. We had frequent meetings. Sometimes we came here, and the work went very well at the beginning. And the evidence of that is that I asked you to work on non-fundamental shocks, but before that, you wanted to implement the approach of our paper with Lennart Liep and Telg, and you realized that we made a mistake in that paper. We made a mistake in the way we computed the standard error, but you didn't dare to tell us, and because this is one of your feature. You can look, shy or polite, name it, and it took you some time to explain to me that maybe with the famous professors Liep and Telg, we made a mistake in our paper. This is also why I asked them to come in this assessment committee, and I already want to thank them for their evaluation. Indeed, when we met, it was weird because we didn't meet before, only online, I think. And the first time I saw you, I was impressed. How can it be so tall for an Italian, I was used to have tall Dutch students, but the first tall Italian I knew. We work on that paper, and we work as well with Elisa Voisin at that time, a former PhD student. And to be honest, there are many elements that didn't work, so we lost some months. But after that, you made a lot of progress on the first paper, on the second paper on climate change, although it's not obvious to have links between these technical issues and the policy issues. Mainly, you didn't dare to tell it to Bertrand Candelon. I'm thankful to Bertrand to be here today again. You didn't dare to tell him that the economic implication was mainly pushed by our co-author, right? So this Claudio Morana, who wanted to have more policy implication, although at the beginning we mainly work on the technical issues. Yes, so this is what you did for the first two papers, but you soon realized not only that you had we did some mistake, but that these models were complicated to estimate due in particular to initial conditions. And this is why we look at the papers by Professor Beck, and we try to improve the algorithm and the estimation from her paper. So I would like also to thank Frederick Beck to be here in the committee. You had the opportunity to spend a visiting, I think 3 months, a visiting period in Italy. You were hosted by Professor Gianluca Kubada. So we started at that time to work on chapter 4 of your thesis. And I hope, we now have a revised version, but I hope that we will have time to work on those papers again. given that you are, many people know, but you are going to now start a postdoctoral position at Tor Vergata, and we will have the opportunity to work on these issues. Yes. So you are, when I say lucky, you are more lucky than some PhD students. Not only you spent several months in Rome at the Tor Vergata University with Elisa Voisin. I remember that a fresh new PhD student, now he is the your witness, Daniel, asked me after his first days of his thesis, can I also join Francesco to Rome for this visit? So you see, so everyone wanted to go with you there. Thanks to your papers and the collaboration with Joan Jaziak, you also went to Toronto to a visit you were visiting Joan Jaziak, and you have improved your papers, in particular on the GCOF estimators. I would like to say I thank, of course, the assessment committee, but I also would like to thank the other members of the committee, namely Arthur, Thomas Del Barrio Castro, and Inés, who did a nice job to make this ceremony happen and to read your thesis. Yes, something I forgot. You see that I owe a lot to Francesco. I'm not talking about our joint papers, but Francesco made me discover the guanciale. That means, for those who do not know, the guanciale is the cheek of the pork. And I have a friend and co-author for 25 years, Gianluca Kuboda. And Gianluca never told me that I should do the carbonara with the guanciale and not the pancetta as I used to do. So you see, in French we say, I translate, trust your. I mean, you have to be careful about your enemies. I take care of you see what I mean? Of your friends, I take care of. You see what I mean?
We say that in Italian as well.
You see that in Italian? But in the opposite. So it was a discovery for me. Now, I mean, I've almost finished, but I have a message for Gianluca that many people know, that if he is going to work with you, be careful at parties, because Francesco tends to think loudly in Italian at those parties, and to whistle a bit also very loudly. This is the end for me. You see that it's also the tradition to say some words to the family in foreign languages. For that, I learned Dutch, German, Chinese. But so my brain is full of all these foreign languages. So today, for Italian, I would like that Gianluca take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. If the chair allows me to do that, I would like to say some words in Italian to Giancaterini family. Cara famiglia Giancaterini, ovviamente il risultato di questa tesi è il risultato del lavoro e dell'ingegno di Francesco, ma siamo ben consapevoli che senza le opportunità che voi gli avete dato e senza il vostro esempio oggi non sarebbe qua. Quindi è un successo anche vostro e ci congratuliamo con voi e speriamo di vedervi presto a Roma. Grazie.
You can take your seat. You can take your seat and feel comfortable. And thank you for the laudatio, which was very nice. Dear Dr. Giancaterini, also on behalf of Maastricht University, I congratulate you, your family, your friends, and your supervisors with the degree you have acquired. And I would also like to thank the members of the committee for their contribution. And before closing this session, I would suggest that We take a picture here with Professor Beck on the background, and then later on we'll take a picture, which is a custom at the main stairs in the larger hallway. The audience may already go to the rafter to have a drink and wait you arriving there with your diploma. With this, I close this session, but I first give the floor to Professor Beck.
Oh, okay, just one tiny minutes to congratulate again now Dr. Giancaterini, and I wish Dr. Giancaterini all the best for his future professional life. That's it.
Thank you very much.
Congrats.
Thank you, Professor Beck. With this, I close this session.